Well, good afternoon and welcome on this Wednesday lunchtime to another Lunch and Learn with us here at Action Coach in Birmingham. It's great to have you with us. My name is Steve Chum and I'm one of the coaches for Action Coach. I've also got Annabelle Uel from Stress Free HR. Hi, Annabella.
Hiya.
Good to have you with us again. We were just talking before we started. It's probably about three and a half months since you were last with us. The world has changed even more since then, hasn't it?
It certainly has.
So it's great to have you with us. In this lunchtime, we're going to be talking all about becoming an employer, perhaps for the first time. Finding that first member of staff, going from being a solopreneur, or maybe taking your step into employing your second or your third. But those early stages of becoming an employer in your business. So if you have any questions around that this lunchtime, please stick with us. Listen to what we've got to share with you and ask any questions. Now, we are broadcasting on Zoom this lunchtime. We're also on Facebook Live and also LinkedIn. So please do comment, share the stream, comment and ask any questions. And if you're listening to us later on, perhaps on our YouTube channel or on Facebook, and we finish the live webinar, please do still reach out, place any questions, and either Annabella or myself will come back to you with a response or suggest we have a one-to-one chat. But it's great to have you with us listening. Annabella, tell us a bit about Stress Free HR and what you do.
Okay, so I set up my business 4 years ago, but I've been in HR, I can now say it's been 20 years. So I started my career in 2001. And so my business particularly focuses on micro businesses. So those businesses up to about 10 employees, and particularly those recruiting or becoming an employer for the first time. I decided to niche my business. So as I'm sure you as an action coach recommend on occasion, is to find something that you think that you're really good at and that you like to service primarily. Obviously, I do all the other stuff and I can support bigger businesses, but actually my passion comes from getting your foundations right. I often find in my career, I have found that the issues you get later on in a business stem from not having the basics done from the beginning. So I figured if I niche my business and focus on the smaller businesses and even those employing for the first time, actually laying those foundations in the right way will bring quicker and better success for businesses as they grow. And that's where I feel like I'll add the most value in the work that I do.
Brilliant. It's great to have you with us, Annabella. You made me feel so old then when you said 20 years ago, because I remember the millennium and the celebrations in the Dome so clearly. And I think I've just lost a few more hairs thinking about that. 20 years ago seems crazy, doesn't it? But you're absolutely right in terms of niche. I mean, we talk to our clients a lot about, understanding who their target audience is, but also in terms of the business, starting with the end in mind. And one of the my more enjoyable workshops, webinars, whatever you want to call them, is when we sort of map out the structure of an organization. What's it going to look like in 5 years, in 10 years time? And it's great fun actually sort of thinking about, well, who might we want to employ? What might we want to be doing ourselves? What roles might we need in the business? What might we want to outsource? And starting with that end vision is really important, isn't it?
It certainly is. And what I'm going to take the audience through is around more the legalities of taking on your first employee. But certainly that's not the only thing that people should be thinking about at this stage in their business growth, because there's lots of other things that the law doesn't tell you should be doing, like establishing what your culture is, what your core values for your business are. And things like that, because actually when you recruit that first employee, if you're not clear about what it is that you want for your own business, then how are you supposed to find the person who shares that with you? If you're not testing if you only test for skill, yes, you might get the most qualified person, but if they don't buy into your company's values and the way that you do things, then actually you're probably going to clash, and then the relationship's not going to be a great one. So yes, I'll cover the legalities, but there is so much more that's needed in consideration.
Absolutely. We had a great webinar last Wednesday, I think it was, with James Bolly, and we're talking about purpose and understanding the purpose of your business. And that's so important, isn't it? Again, it's about thinking about what is, we talk about vision, we talk about mission, but the culture and the purpose of your organization. There's a great book, Annabella, called The Purpose Revolution, one of my favorites we've done in our book club. And it just talks about understanding how important that is for recruiters and employees. It becomes, sort of a key focal point of any recruitment process, in terms of both for the employee or the candidates matching that to the business, and the business matching that to the candidates. Because if your purpose is aligned, you're going to get the right people, and they're going to enjoy what they're doing and feel they get value out of it.
Absolutely.
So I've had a question from Claire, which is coming in straight away. Claire, thanks for your question. She's just asking, is there the right time to take on your first employee? Annabella, what's your thoughts on that? And I'll then give mine. But
is there the right time to take your first employee? Well, often business owners delay. They delay for a variety of reasons. They're worried if they might not be able to pay the employee, so they wait until they have enough cash in their business so that they can afford to pay a salary. And that sometimes is counterintuitive, because you want more business. The employee will bring you more business, or they'll take away some of the work that is stopping you from getting more business. So there's the challenge around the mindset there. And then there are fears around, what if things go wrong? I'm too scared to take the first step. So is there a right time to take on a first employee? Well, one, yes, you do need enough business to be able to pay them. And I do know of a lot of business owners who actually end up earning less than their employees to get onto that ladder, to be able to do that. And that's a decision that the business owner has to make for themselves, about what level of sacrifice that they're willing to make to help their business progress to the next level. It's about whether the business owner is ready to take that step. But certainly they need to be prepared enough, have done enough research themselves about what's required of them. So sometimes I do a session with somebody thinking about taking on their first employee to outline what the requirements are. And then once they have that session, they then realize that actually they're not ready, because there's either more costs involved that they weren't prepared for, or there are considerations they haven't made. And so it's better to be informed before you take that step, rather than jumping in and thinking that you can do it without having considered the repercussions of not having done that research. I do an MOT as such for micro businesses. So, I spend some time with them and go through their foundations, make sure that their knowledge and understanding is accurate, but equally that they did put the things that I'm going to run through in this webinar in place when they took on that first employee. I color code it red, amber, green, so that they have an understanding of what's well in their business, what's recommended, which is amber, and what's red, which is you need to fix. And in 4 years, I've never had a micro business come back all green. So what tends to happen is somebody gets recruited, they don't either issue a contract, or they don't take out insurance, or they don't do the pension. And so it's really important that before you take that first step, you become informed as to what's needed, so that you don't find yourself in problems later on.
I completely agree, Annabella. Being informed, making informed decisions about recruitment and any other aspects of the business is really important. Doing your due diligence. I was again doing a workshop on marketing last week and talking about understanding what your competitors are doing, research the marketplace, research your industry, and just simple things like knowing what the going rates for the kind of role you're thinking of employing somebody into. But my only bit of advice, and to add to what you said, Annabella, is there will never be the perfect time. Perfection doesn't exist. At some point, you're going to have to take a risk with it. It's about calculating that risk and taking an informed risk, I think, isn't it? But also mindset. You talked earlier on about mindset. It is about, you talked a bit about fear, false expectations becoming real. We say here at Action Coach, the easiest way to get over fear is sometimes just to do it. It's about, knowing when to take that jump, isn't it? I think is really what Claire was trying to get to. And I think what you said is absolutely right. Hopefully, Claire, what we're both saying is there is an element of risk in everything we do in business. It's about researching and taking a calculated risk and making sure you understand all the implications, which Annabella is going to talk to us a bit in a moment, in terms of what you need to be considering when employing for the first time. Is there a halfway house, Annabella? I mean, we often talk to our clients about outsourcing or taking on maybe part-time or sort of taking on a sort of a virtual assistant, that type of thing, to see if the workload is there. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it all depends on what the need is, I suppose. If you're if you're finding that you can't deliver the services, or you can't go out and look for business because you are drowning in paperwork, then I find a lot of business owners start with outsourcing it, perhaps to VAs and stuff like that, or to the bookkeepers, to do the accounts. But there comes a point where you need to consider bringing it in-house for a few reasons. One, primarily, is that outsourcing service that you're using isn't committed to your business. In terms of, you are a client, so of course they're committed in respect of, you're paying them a service, but bringing them in-house creates a different commitment, a different level of loyalty, a different level of perfection, and a different type of conversation as well, right? You can,
relationship.
It is it's a completely different relationship. And you need to remember as well, especially now with IR35, that there needs to come a point where, are they actually working for you? So I've seen many scenarios where, although people are part-time, they're the only person that you're working for. They're only doing work for you. You're telling them when to do the work, and actually the relationship has shifted from a little bit of support to actually the relationship of either a worker or employee. So experimenting with what workload you have to see where it's better placed. But then, once it becomes apparent that you have enough to give to somebody either on a part-time or full-time basis, then you consider bringing them in-house.
Just for the benefits of those viewers who might not know, I know you can probably do a whole webinar workshop on IR35, Annabella. Be able to, in a nutshell, just explain what it is for those who may not know what IR35 is.
So IR35 came in officially in April, and it's about determining the relationship between the person who's providing the services and the person who's paying for those services. And I'm not an IR35 expert, so I'll have to put my disclaimer out there. But certainly it existed already, in the sense that the revenue, the HMRC, could assess the relationship between somebody who is providing services for somebody who is paying for those services. And there were and there are tests that they apply to see whether or not the relationship is one of self-employment or employment. The differences being things like, do you provide them uniforms? So are they branded, representing your business? Do you dictate to them when they do the work? Do they ask you for permission to have time off? Can they send in a substitute instead of doing the work themselves? All of this basis looks at control, and how much control the person who's paying for the services has over the person who's delivering the services. The more control there is, the less likely it's a separate relationship and more one of an employment relationship.
Very high profile cases, haven't there, in the media over the last 12 months or so? So I think Uber is one of them, and Go, Deliveroo, some of these gig economy industries that have popped up perhaps over the last 12 months or more. So I think that's where it sort of stemmed from, hasn't it? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so for example, in the Uber case, my understanding is that the reason they failed was the lack of the right of substitution. So once they accepted a job, they couldn't then turn that job down and say, I'm sending someone else to do the job on my behalf. So there was control there, and therefore they were expected to deliver the service themselves, the Uber driver. And that played a big factor on whether or not they were classed as a worker or a self-employed person. So ultimately, it's control, looking at how much control you have over the individual providing those services. The less control you have, the less you can dictate when they do the work, how they do the work, etc., will be better and less likely to sit inside IR35.
Brilliant. As I say, I know you can do a whole workshop webinar, whole afternoon on IR35 and and many other aspects of recruitment. We've only got a short space of time, but if you're just tuned in, we've got Annabella Ewell from Stress Free HR. Please do ask any questions about becoming an employer or taking that step into being an employee for the first time, or perhaps expanding your small business for the first time. We've got a question from Deepak, Annabella, and we've sort of touched on this slightly, but he's asking sort of how early should a business owner start thinking about preparing to be an employee for the first time? At what stage, and what should they be considering?
Okay, so I often suggest that you work backwards, and my recommendation is about 6 months. So if you consider that ordinarily, and obviously our marketplace is a little bit different at the moment. I read an article this morning that says people don't actually want to go back to work because of furlough. So you might find that you're struggling in the recruitment market. But if we work backwards, people tend to have at least a month's notice period to give if they're not readily available. So that already adds a month to it. Then you have to take time to interview. So depending on how many applicants you have, you could spend 2 weeks interviewing. And that depends whether or not you do 1 phase, 2 phase, whether you have assessments that you include in there, whether you do trial periods, that kind of stuff. So let's add 2 or 3 weeks to that process. You then have the shortlisting and the inviting to interview. So we'll add another 2 weeks to that. So we're already looking at about 2.5 months. You then have your advertising time. So, you're looking at perhaps 3 weeks for advertising to make sure that you give the applicants time to actually see your advert and submit it. So we're looking at about 3.5 months. Then you've got the time that you need to take to write the advert. Before you write the advert, you write the job description. Before you write the job description, you have to identify what actually needs to be done. So actually, when you decide that actually you think you need somebody, you need to know a good 6 months in advance. So you can, 1, speak to someone like me and find out what you need to put in place. And 2, you actually have to give time to recruit. The worst thing that you can do is put bums in seats.
Yes.
I see it so often that people are like, I need someone yesterday. I'm just going to go and recruit someone. And then they don't make the right considerations about what they actually need, first of all, in the role. And then second of all, in the person who's going to do the role. And then if you consider that recruitment, it takes up so much of your time to get that person in. If you get it wrong, you've just wasted a chunk of your time.
Completely agree. You just remind me of this slide. I haven't particularly got it ready for today, but it is about finding that right person. And I have been in interview situations myself, and when I was in the public sector in particular, where interviews processes have gone on, and because they are so keen to get somebody in, I would suggest, rightly or wrongly, that the wrong person has been put in the post. And that's not fair on both the organisation, the team they're going to be part of, or the individual. It puts stress on all aspects of that process, and ultimately it will cost you more in terms of time and expenditure long term, because you'll end, in many cases, that won't be the right fit, and they'll end up leaving you, and you'll end up having to start again. And it'll be 8-9 months down the road that you get that employee in place.
But it's not just your time, right? So consider that if you already have a team and you bring in the wrong person, you will either upset the team, overwhelm the team, because then they'll have left and now they've got to pick up the slack again, and they lose confidence in your ability to find the right people. So the repercussions, they're exponential.
And in terms of thinking about, again, you're talking about timescales. One of the things we say to our clients a lot, Annabella, is about the thrills and skills of what you do at the moment. So what is it you enjoy doing? What is it you have the skills to do? And start that thinking process as early as you can in your business. What is it you could pay? And the other thing I often say is about value on your head. If you're sitting there doing the invoicing, and you could pay somebody else half the amount to sit there and do what you would pay yourself if you were in that job, then that gives you a good indication of the kinds of people you might need in the business. So start that thinking process early on.
Absolutely.
So in terms of, you thought, take a small or a solopreneur, a small business, they've thought about the kinds of roles they might want to fill. Is there any way of, and I can think of experiences where somebody's just put everything and anything into the job description. They've got a coordinator and a fundraiser and a national this and something that, and you end up sort of, they're trying to find that, the jack of all trades and master of none, dare I say, to use a phrase. How would one go about sort of, putting together a reasonable and fair job description? We've talked a bit about research already, but any thoughts on that, Annabella?
Yeah, so I see this a lot in that, particularly that first hire. So it's different if you're looking for someone in business development. because you're clear that that role is sales related. It's about getting in sales, and that's all you want them to do. And then the rest of it, you want someone to pick up your accounts, to do your social media, to look at your marketing plan, to do all your admin. And actually what you're starting to do is pull all the stuff that you don't like doing or don't feel like you've got time to do, and you're expecting to find one person who's going to be great at all of it. So my advice in that scenario is to look at what the biggest need in your business is. So if it's marketing related, then focus your efforts on finding a great person who fulfills that part of the role. If they can do the other bits, then that's great, but don't prioritize trying to find someone who can do all of it, because I can guarantee you, you're not likely to find that person. So highlight what skill set you're really looking to fill. The traits of an individual who you want to be able to pick up all the other bits is around people who are willing to learn, who you know, are happy to get stuck in and do other bits that perhaps aren't their expertise. But if you're heavily expecting to get somebody who has a marketing background and an admin background and accounts background and all of that, you are going to struggle to find that person, and you're likely to compromise on who you pick. So my advice in that respect is prioritize what is the biggest need in your business in that scenario, and recruit for that. And then whether you pick up the slack on the other bits and pieces, or whether you outsource those specific little bits that you can, then do it that way, because otherwise you're going to find that you're just going to struggle to get the right person in.
Absolutely. And in terms of the process, you know, I would say to any small business owner, do seek advice from somebody such as Annabella, you know, that make sure you get that process right. If you get it right the first time, you know, get that first hire done, you know, make sure it goes well, get the right advice, the right support. And important to stress that HR is different from recruitment, you know, interlinked, but very different disciplines. And so getting the right support, the right advice at the early stages, think about where your business where you want the business to be. And have a plan is so important. But I'm sure there are legal requirements. You've spoken about one or two. What other things do employers need to be considering in terms of legal requirements, Annabella, in terms of that first employee?
Yes, okay. So there are about 7 specific legal requirements that are needed. The first one is around pay. So making sure that you're paying at least the minimum wage. Obviously there are different ranges, and in April, it used to be if you were under 25 you were a certain rate, but in April that changed to under 23. So just make sure that you are clear on what the minimum wages are. And then obviously if you are only paying the minimum wage, then as your employees increase in ages, you need to make sure that you pay them the right rate moving forward. So that's the first kind of a step. The other, there's two that are linked in a particular way. So business owners are they work for the Inland Revenue as tax collectors, and they work for the Home Office as immigration officials. I'll speak about them both separately. So we are tax collectors because we must collect the tax and pay it to the Inland Revenue on behalf of our employees. So in order to do that, business owners need to be registered for PAYE. So some self-employed people who aren't limited company owners who take on their first employee they do their own self-assessments. But once you take on your first employee, you must register for PAYE and you must pay them through the payroll. Even if they don't qualify to pay tax, let's say because they are lower earners and they don't actually pay tax, the employee doesn't pay tax because they're part-time or whatever the case may be, you still need to process their pay through the right methods.
Just on that point, we've got Tom who's just asking, can his accountant deal with all of that, or does he have to do it himself or go through a different organization?
Yeah, so there's lots of accountants offer payroll services in addition to their accountancy services. So you can, excuse me, you can do that. Some HR businesses, so I, for example, offer payroll services through my business as well. So that's an option as well. And then you can outsource it to a specific payroll bureau. So you can do it that way. Or
So there are
equally, you can do it
options.
yourself.
Yeah.
You know, if you do your own accounts, I know Xero support payroll.
I was just about to say, so yes, some
Yeah,
account packages do, yes.
yeah. So doing it yourself is tricky if you don't have any kind of finance background to spot specific things. It's more advisable that specifically for payroll, if there's one thing that employees will not forgive you for, it's messing up their pay. So I would
Very
highly
sensitive area,
recommend.
isn't it, Annabella? It's one of the things that everyone scrutinizes. I say most people scrutinize their pay slip, if nothing else,
Yes,
that they get from the business, you know.
yes, that's it. So if you want to keep your employees happy, make sure their pay is right. And if you are not very confident about doing it yourself, then I would suggest that either you outsource it to your accountant, you outsource it to a payroll bureau, or you come to a HR business like mine that also offers payroll services. So yeah, so
Perfect.
so
So
hopefully that
we've got,
answers his question.
it does. Thank you, and I hope, Tom, that does help. So we got to pay and tax. There was a
Yes.
number of others.
So we are tax collectors, and you must pay your employees through the right systems. And we are immigration officials in that we must check people's employment right to work in the UK. So we had this magical thing happened at the end of the year called Brexit. We are fast approaching the 30th of June. Now, the 30th of June is the date where European nationals who have lived in this country, who were in this country as at the 31st of December, 11 p.m., had the right to apply for settled status and therefore continue to be allowed to work in this country without restrictions.
I believe that was in the headlines today, wasn't it? The government have just announced to the last call, I think, for people to register.
And I'll put it on the webinar in case people aren't aware. It's not just employees and adults. Anybody who is applying for settled status should be applying for their children also. So that's really important, because otherwise they could miss out on the opportunity to become settled themselves. So I'm only adding it in because I think that's really important,
It's
and
a
I
great
don't think
point. Yeah.
made clear enough. So let me talk about the penalty of not doing this properly. If you employ someone who does not have the right to work in this country, the business could face a fine of up to £20,000 per employee that they are unable to show has the right to work in this country. Wow. It is huge. It's a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
I have in my MOT that I do, is one of the questions I ask. It has been read lots of times because people assume that because they are British, they have the right to work here. Point isn't about whether or not they have the right to work here at the time that you employ them. It's about whether you can show that you checked that they have the right to work here. Now, they might have the right to work here. That if you're unable to demonstrate at the point of being asked, you will be fined. If they do have the right to work here, you have to pay the fine before you can appeal it. So if you have 3 employees, that's 60 grand you've got to pay out front.
Pay out front before you
appeal it.
Wow.
And then God knows when you get your money back. So for the sake of a 20-second check of a passport, and I'll talk about what's changing on the 1st of July, for the sake of a 20-second check of a document and writing on it to say that you've certified and confirmed it's the right, is a valid document, it could save you 20 grand per employee. So it's not worth not doing. In my 20-year career, I have so far found 2 people who did not have the right to work in this country. Now, 2 is too many. One of them worked for 10 years in a government institution that I worked for, who had slipped under the net through using somebody else's national insurance number. So it can happen. So it's really important to find to check. All you're doing is checking, right? So on the 1st of July, which is right like next week, gosh, already next week, the rules change about how you check European nationals' right to work in this country. Previously, or up until the 30th of June, all you had to do was check their passport. Provided they were from a country in the European Union, you just took a copy of the passport page with their photo, and then you signed and certified that it was a true copy and you dated it. And that was your proof that you checked their right to work. And if they're British, then you took a copy of their British passport. There are other mechanisms to check. So if somebody, for example, I worked for a business that had a lot of Cornish employees. So people in Cornwall typically, I don't know, don't need to go abroad because they have the beaches on their doorstep. So nobody had a passport. So you can check using their birth certificate and another document. And you can go on the DirectGov website and check what documents are required for validation. But typically speaking, if you can get someone's passport, is probably the best way to check their right to work. So if they're British national and they have a British passport, that's all you need to do. Take a copy of their passport and certify it. This is a true copy, and sign it and date it, and you've done your due diligence. From the 1st of July, if you employ somebody from the European Union, you must request their settlement code. If they are unable to provide you with your settlement code, with their settlement code, which you will then go and validate through a portal on the DirectGov website. If you're unable to validate that code, then you should not be allowing them to start working. It is not acceptable, and I make this very, very clear, it is not acceptable to let them start working and check later. You must check before you start employing them that they have the right to work. Because if they don't have the right to work and they've worked for you for a week, what are you going to do with their pay? If you pay them, you've breached the requirements. If you don't pay them, then they're going to make a fuss about it because they want you to pay them. Yeah, so you find yourself in an impossible situation.
Absolutely. I've got a question. It's linked to all this from Sarah, Annabella, and you may or may not, it may be a VAT run we go down, we don't want to go down. But in terms of vetting checks generally, she's asking what vetting checks can she undertake as a new employer. We've talked a bit about, immigration checks, passport checks, things such as, I guess, as DBS checks or CRB checks, as it used to be called. What other checks can an employer or should an employer do as part of their due diligence? What's appropriate and what's not appropriate?
Sure. So one of the other legal requirements that I was coming to is around DBS checks. So,
okay,
so we can jump to that one. So that's fine. So if you work in an environment that requires a DBS check, then you will need to do that for your employees. And the level of the DBS checks will be determined by what services you provide. So if you work with vulnerable people and children, then you're probably going to have an enhanced DBS. Whereas for other roles, it might just be a lower standard DBS. So it is determined by the exposure that that individual will have to the clients. But if it's required, and ordinarily your clients who you're providing the services to will put it in the agreement with you that whoever you send will need to have these checks done.
Employer, Annabella, is there any sort of definition as to what kind of roles would need a DBS check versus what wouldn't, or is it?
It's not necessarily about the roles, it's more about who the service user is. So let's say, for example, an electrician might never need a DBS, but actually if they do electrical works within a school, then they would need a DBS.
Yes.
So it's more around where the services are provided rather than the specific role. Does that make sense?
I'm with you, yes. So it's about thinking more widely for our listeners about the kind of work this employee is going to be doing. If they're never leaving the premises and not really working with anybody apart from other adults in the building, it's probably fair to assume that a DBS check isn't required. But if they're going to be delivering services, as you quite rightly say, in a school or going out and working with children,
vulnerable adults
home,
or children, yeah,
anything like that.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I don't know if that answers the question.
Sarah, yes, it does answer your question. I hope it does for you. So, Annabella, so yeah, so other legal requirements. Is there anything else we need to cover off?
Yep. So we've got a few more. I think there's 3 more. So the next one is insurance. I didn't used to add this question to my MOT because I just took it as a given. But actually, through a conversation with a new client, I happened to ask, do you have employer's liability insurance? And he said, I don't think so. And I thought, crap, I've got to add this to my MOT because it's an obvious question that actually a lot of people don't know. And the other issue is that a lot of businesses have business insurance that they think includes employer's liability insurance, and actually it doesn't. So you need employer's liability insurance. It must cover at least 5 million from the first day of their employment. 5 million and be from an authorized insurer. The key point to make here is that if you don't take out this insurance, you could be fined £2,500 per day for every day that you have an employee and you're not insured. So wow. I was talking about 20 grand per employee for the other one. This is 2.5 grand per day that you're not insured. So this is really, really important as well. So don't just assume that your policy includes employee liability insurance. You need to make sure that you have it. So,
and that's where working with somebody like yourself, or dare I said, a recruitment specialist as well, would be also asking for those things before you start that process.
I've never come across a recruiter that's asked for the question whether they've got employer's liability insurance. It's not a standard kind of question. Again, I think there's an assumption that when you come to that stage in your business that you would have it, but actually it's really important to make sure that you do. So when I have clients come to me who are taking on their first employee, we run through what the legal requirements are.
What I've got in my mind, I'm mixing it up slightly, is apprentice providers who will always ask for these sorts of things.
But the apprenticeships have a whole set of T's and C's, and within those will be that you must provide the level of cover that they expect, etc., etc. So
But no, some great points. So insurance, £2,500 a day could be a very costly error of judgment if you haven't got it in place. So another great point, Annabella, you know, saving us thousands here just in one lunch and learn over half an hour. So it's fantastic. So
we've got 2 more things left on the list. Yes. 2 more things. So the next one is around pension. So when you become an employer, you must set up a pension scheme for your employees. Whether they qualify for the pension scheme or not makes no difference, because even if they don't qualify for the scheme, they have the right to request to be opted in. So that's important to set up. And there are some accountants out there who do that service for their clients. But equally, you know, the most common ones for employers are the People's Pension or Nest, and they're fairly easy to set up, and they get done, you know, fairly quickly. The employer contribution is 3%, and the employee contribution is 5%, and it's a cost that the person who is taking on their first employee must factor in case the employee does join the pension scheme. There are rules around what makes them qualify and stuff like that, but I'm mindful of time, so I don't want to.
That's fine. There's something about auto enrollment, isn't there? That
yeah. So there's qualifying criteria for automatically enrolling your staff into the pension scheme. They must be aged between 22 and state pension age. They must earn at least £10,000 per year, and they must work in the UK ordinarily. If they meet those 3 criteria, then they should be auto-enrolled. You can request that your pension scheme is set up as a 3-month deferment, which means that they are enrolled in month 4 if they qualify. And so it delays it slightly. But if the employee requests to join the pension scheme from day 1, you must have it available to let them join. You're not allowed to opt them out. So you must enroll them, and then they must request to be opted out within that first month for them to get their contributions back that they made in that particular month. So that's the pension.
And we've got
And then
one more.
yes, the last one is what we ordinarily call the contract of employment. The contract of employment is what we call it, but actually it's called a written statement of particulars. And the law changed in April 2019 to say that actually what you used to be able to issue it within 8 weeks of them starting their employment, and now you have to issue it on their no later than their first day of employment. And again, this is one area of my MOT that often comes up red, that that there's no contract in place. And again, that comes inherently from that experience of people taking on their first employee. Let's get someone in, but actually they never wrap it up in the paperwork. They never actually do the formalized bit properly to start off with. And then before you know it, you've got 2, 3, 4 employees. Nobody has a contract or written particulars. Those expectations about, you know, what I'm going to pay you for what you're going to do, how much holiday you have, you know, there's lots of things that need to go in it. It's just never done. And it only becomes a problem really when there's a dispute. Yeah, when everything's hunky-dory, nobody makes a fuss about it. But suddenly, you know you have a problem in your business when your employer is saying, can I have a copy of my contract? Yeah, because normally they want to know what their notice period is, or they want to check that something that you've probably done doesn't fall foul of what the contract says. So if you go looking for that employment contract and it's not there, it's probably because you never issued it. So, you know, it's important that you get that outlined. And just to highlight as well, just because it's not done, as in it's not written down, doesn't mean a contract doesn't exist. The second your employee accepts payment for the work that they've done, you have created a contract. And therefore, you know, a lot of people say, oh, you know, you don't have a contract because I never wrote one. Well, actually, there's been an exchange of services and there's a verbal agreement about what that is. So it's important to get that written down.
My university days of law with payments and consideration, etc., but we won't go there now. Just backtracking slightly on a question around vetting, Alex is just asking about visas for overseas employees. Is there anything you can add just to help him on that? He said, yeah. Where should he start?
Yes. Okay. So if you're and I sigh quite heavily with this. So I am not, and again, not a visa expert, nor do I want to be one. Unfortunately, Brexit is going to bring a lot of challenges when it comes to recruitment of just recruitment. Overseas anybody who's not a British national or from Ireland, because there is exemptions there. Now, if the European national potentially that you're looking at has a settlement code, we're sorted. If they don't, then you have to, and so whether it's European or somebody from outside of Europe, so somebody who does not have the right to work here under being a British national, an Irish national, or someone under the settlement scheme. So we'll park those three sets of people to the side, and we're talking about everybody else. In order to bring somebody who does not meet the other 3 criteria, you must register as a sponsor. From all the webinars I've watched and all the learning that I've done, it's still a minefield in trying to understand the whole sponsorship program. From what I understand, it will cost between, for you and the employee, a good £4,000 in the first year to become a sponsor and sponsor them, and them sponsor themselves as well, because there's a payment. Then there's criteria around the actual role itself. How much does the role pay in order for it to be categorized as a role that can be sponsored to be recruited into? So there's actually a lot of consideration that needs to be made into whether or not you want to become a sponsor, because the sponsorship costs don't last just for the one-off payment the first time you recruit them. There are ongoing costs if they remain employed, whether or not you have to keep paying the sponsorship costs for that particular employee. And it's not just limited anymore to hard to fill roles. They are relaxing the rules a little bit more about what roles are being able to be sponsored from outside nationals. But I would suspect that for a lot of businesses taking on their first employee, that the costs already involved in recruiting someone for the first time, they won't be wanting to add sponsorship costs to those roles unless the role is so specialized that they have no choice because they can't find people within the pool of candidates that have the right to work here already. So I don't know if I've skirted around the question, to be honest. It's a really difficult question to answer because there's so much involved in being a sponsor. And if I would suggest that anybody who's thinking of becoming a sponsor for recruitment in that respect, speak to a specialist about what actually is involved, because it's not as straightforward as it used to be.
There you are, Alex. I hope that answers your question to some degree, that it's a very complex area, and perhaps one we can't go into a lot of detail in this webinar, but considering the cost and considering the process of becoming a sponsor, do connect with Annabella after the webinar or directly. Her details are on the screen, and she will either be able to answer some of your questions in more detail or signpost you in the right direction. You touched on very briefly there the costs of recruiting. Is there would you be willing to put a sort of a ballpark figure out there? I suppose it varies so much depending on the industry and the role and who you're trying to attract to the business.
Yeah, so I made a quick list here because otherwise you forget sometimes what the costs are. So ordinarily, when people are looking to take on their first employee, all they think about is salary. I want to pay them 20 grand a year or £10 an hour, but that's not the only cost. So you need to think bigger than that because there are more costs involved. So you need to consider that potentially you have employers' national insurance that you have to pay. I've already touched on it, but you've got the pension. I've already touched on it, but now you've got employers' liability insurance that you've got to pay for. If you're if it's a business development role, you might be looking at commission. So then you need to consider your commission structure to make sure that it's balanced. I did this exercise with someone who was looking to recruit someone in business development. And actually, when they structured their commission structure, I said to the guy, I'm really sorry, but you're not going to make any money because you haven't worked the commission structure well enough to understand what you're bringing in versus what you're paying out. So you really need to consider the commission structure if you're doing that. Then you need to consider your time for the time to recruit. You need to consider whether or not you're taking time out to train somebody. That's a cost. Never undervalue your own time. I'm sure, Stephen, you will advocate that.
Absolutely.
Then you have costs like, do they need a uniform? Do they need supplies? So, if you are in a cleaning business, for example, and you're taking your first employee, then perhaps you need to provide all the equipment that's needed to go off-site and do a particular job with someone else. Are you providing a car or a van? So if you are, then you've got to purchase the car or van, or you've got to lease it. You've got insurance costs there. Does the individual need computer? Do you need software for the computer, IT support? Do they need a mobile phone? Do they need business cards? Is there other stationery you need to advertise? There are so many, they're only little bits and pieces that you add together. But actually, when you add them all together, suddenly you've spent another 10 grand in your first year, taken on your first employee. So this comes back to what we were talking about right at the beginning around planning. So don't just plan what the legal side of things are, but cost it. If you have an accountant, speak to your accountant, understand your liabilities when it comes to their salary and what additional costs might be incurred as a business, taking on the first employee. And then just look at the environment. Where do you need to spend money to get the new employee up to speed? And what tools do they need to do the job? Because you've got to give it to them, and that will all cost money.
It's all what we say hidden costs or the on costs. That it's just about, again, it comes back to what we were saying right at the very beginning, wasn't it? It's about when finding the right person, you found the right person, have a plan right from before you've even found them. Have a plan as to the person you want, the organization, how you want it to grow, but also the role, and think about all the costs associated with that person. Everything from buying business cards to IT equipment to a mobile phone. etc., etc.
Using someone like me, I didn't add that into my list.
There we go. So absolutely, plan, and well, what they say, fail to plan, plan to fail. And we hope that you won't fail. But just before we finish up, we talked about the recruitment process. We talked about so many aspects of the 7 things to look out for, Annabella. In terms of once you've finished the recruitment, those people who have been unsuccessful, well, I've got a question from Jack, actually. He's asking, how can we feed back, and what should we feed back on to unsuccessful candidates? And I guess linked to that, a question I had is, how long should we keep that information on our systems in our organization?
Okay, so I'll take Jack's question first. So what do we feed back? Feedback is a touchy subject. And you need to be very careful about what feedback you give. Particularly if you are an inexperienced recruiter, where rightly or wrongly, you have made decisions that do not fit within the law. So there was a case not so long ago where a male individual applied for a job in, I think it was in an NHS hospital. And the team were 3 young females, if I recall correctly. And the feedback he got was that the team didn't feel like he would fit in. 1, because they said that he was old enough to be their dad. And 2, that they just didn't feel that he would fit in with the team, because ultimately the perception given was that they were all female and he was male. And he took them to court for age discrimination and race and sex discrimination, and he won. And that all stemmed ultimately because of the feedback that he got. Had they not fed that information back, he would have been none the wiser. So I'm not suggesting that you don't give feedback. I'm just suggesting that whatever feedback you give, you make it, you do it in a way that you can validate based on the information you've collected from the recruitment process. Yeah. Does that make sense? So,
absolutely. I mean, we've the words that are going through my mind is equality and diversity. We haven't got time to go down that route today, but I think it's really important that if you're not sure, then get some advice. Equality and diversity, there are those protected characteristics. I think race, sex, religion, etc., etc. And I know you know all about it, Annabella. We haven't got time to go into it today, but to our listeners, if you're unsure what you can and can't, then just think equality and diversity before you consider what you're feeding back.
Factual stuff.
Absolutely.
Stuff that relates directly back to the interview process. They didn't answer the question well enough. They didn't demonstrate they had the experience. That's all factual to the recruitment need, as opposed to making it more personal, because that's where the trouble tends to sit. Yeah. In terms of just wrapping up your last question around how long you keep stuff for, we are all aware now of the GDPR legislation that came in a few years ago. The GDPR legislation says you must not keep things for longer than necessary. So you are entitled to bring a claim to the Employment Tribunal. And for those of you that don't know, you don't need to be an employee to bring a tribunal claim. So if you have, and you brought it up just now about protected characteristics. So yes. If an individual who came for an interview or part of the recruitment process believes that they have been discriminated against due to one of the various protected characteristics that exist within the legislation, they have the right to bring an employment tribunal claim. The process itself allows, it's roughly 4.5 months to bring that claim. I won't go into details about how they do it, but that's how long roughly you can do it for. My recommendation is that you keep all interview records for 6 months. In the event that a claim is made, you then have the records to refer to. In terms of candidate CVs, you might think to yourself, oh, I might have a vacancy later on. This candidate was really close to that one, but I chose someone else. I'll keep their CV just in case I have another opening soon, which I see a lot.
I've heard of it a lot as well, yes.
Yes. In that scenario, remember that you can only justifiably keep it if you have a legitimate reason. But you must ask for that permission. So in that scenario, if a candidate came close and you want to keep their CV, email them to say, you know, I'm really sorry on this occasion you haven't been successful. However, we would love to retain your CV for X amount of time. Always give them a time frame. You know, in the event that another vacancy, are you happy for us to do this? And then get their confirmation. And then wherever you keep their CV, keep that confirmation, just in case you get a complaint that you've contacted them unsolicited, and then you can show that that's why you did what you did. But putting a time frame on that means that you have a guide as to when you should destroy it, or to go back to the candidate and say, look, it's been 6 months. I still don't want to get rid of your CV. Can I keep it for a bit longer? But yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Perfect. I'm conscious we've sort of jam-packed so much into one short hour, Annabella, and I really appreciate you giving up that time to us. You know, today we've talked about payroll, tax, vetting requirements, DBS, insurance, employers' liability insurance, pensions, contract, all sorts, as well as planning, recruiting, identifying the role, giving feedback. We've jam-packed this webinar with so much information. Thank you so much, Annabella. All I can say to anybody listening to this, either live or in delay later on, if you listen to it on YouTube or on social media platforms, please do, if you have any questions about becoming an employer or taking that first step, or even if you've got your first employee and you're looking for your next couple, you know, please do reach out to Annabella and have a conversation with her before you make that step. You know, she's talked about the MOT. Just sort of that sense check, really, about the things you need to be thinking of in your organization to make sure that with any recruitment process that it's cost effective and it's effective the first time round, that you're doing the process in the right way, and you're not going to get stung by the tax man or by any other organization, but most importantly, that you can grow your business with the right people around you. And I think it's really important. So please do reach out to Annabella, info@stressfreehr.co.uk, all the W, stressfreehr.co.uk, and her phone numbers on the screen as well. So Annabella, thank you so much. Is there anything you just want to add to round up?
Not really, but I very much advocate that HR doesn't need to be stressful. The stress comes from not knowing. So if you become informed, then you'll find that actually it's not stressful. And HR sits with every role that looks after people. So if you recruit your first employee, HR sits with you, and therefore it's important that you understand what that requirement is.
And I do hope that for all our listeners, firstly, thank you to everybody who's asked questions. It's been great having you with us. I hope we haven't overwhelmed you, but the most important thing I would say is to plan. And, you know, I would love to have a conversation with any of you listening today, or maybe later on, about your business. We offer, similar to Annabella does this MOT, we do a business health check, looking at all aspects of your business. But two of the first areas we look at is, time management, how we make best use of the time. But secondly, looking at that plan, that vision. And we talked at the very beginning of this workshop, this webinar, about your points of culture, what it's like to be part of your organization, what it stands for, and what it'd be like for other people to work for you. So I would love to have that conversation about your business planning and business health in more general terms. And I'd love to have that conversation. Please do connect with me. We've got free business health checks that we'd happily invite you to along. And in terms of HR, again, Annabella can make sure it is what it says on the tin, stress-free HR. Please do reach out to her. If you've got any questions, she will either signpost you. Well, I'm sure she can answer most of them, but if she can't, she's connected in that industry and be able to signpost. People like Alex who want to know about visas will be able to help and signpost for more information as well. Thank you so much again, Annabella. It's been great. So it's been 3.5 months since you were last with us. It's been great having you back again. I hope you hope you can join us again at some point in the future. And for now, have a great summer. And we look forward to working with you again in the very near future. And to all our listeners, we look forward to seeing you on Monday for our next Lunch and Learn here with us at Action Coach in Birmingham. But for now, stay well, stay safe, and make sure you recruit the right person first time round. Take care now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.